All right, today I'd like to talk to you about understanding your trauma, building a trauma egg, and going over that with your therapist. And so let's just jump right in and look at this. One of the things that you're going to put on your egg or you talk about with your therapist is what were the rules in your family. And there were some classic rules that are, that have been around for a long time we use in our profession. Don't talk, don't feel, deny, minimize, blame. And then there's some others like don't think, work covers a multitude of sins. I've heard clients say children to be seen and not heard, don't make dad angry, and the list can go on and on. You know kind of what I'm talking about in your spirit. I mean, I'm sure you know that there were rules in your family. Now, some of them weren't spoken. Some of them were kind of like, I don't know, they were just in the atmosphere. It's just like you just were born knowing this was the rule. Don't make dad mad. Or we don't tell what goes on in the home stays in the home. We don't talk about it out in the public. Or, our family we are two different families. We're a family at church and a family at home. And it's like, we don't talk about this. And somehow or another, either you weren't told or you were told, you don't say anything about this. That's just the rules. Now, also there are roles that you've played out in your family. Now there's the hero. For those of you who have been to a workshop, we've talked about these things either at Faithful and True Ministries or at Bethesda workshops. You've gone through some of these. So there's the hero. They're the ones that, their job is to carry the family name, whether it's through sports or whether it's through some kind of scholastic achievements or Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or whatever. That's your job. The mascot is the one who manages the emotional temperature of a home or a room or a family. And it's like, okay, when there's too much tension, they're to distract. They're to crack the jokes. They're the comedians on Saturday Night Live today. Then the prince and princess where they can do no wrong. The doer who is constantly working and moving and doing, just working. They're the doer. They're the overachiever. Then you've got the saint, the addict, the enabler, and the scapegoat. Now, there may be some other role that would fit better for you to use. You're welcome to do that. This is just some ideas and so forth when you put in what roles you played out in your family. Now, you could have done several. You might have done some that you switched back and forth on. And so if that's true, then just put those up there and talk with your therapist about that as you go through this so you can understand where you switch. We're oftentimes very creative. We're going to swap back and forth where when the need arises, that's what we do, okay? Now, the other things we want to really look at is the levels of abuse that you go through, what they look like. Now, there's two different kinds. One is the invasive abuse, and that's abuse brought on because of loose boundaries. Now, boundaries are kind of like the force field around a ship, and our parents are like the captains of that ship. Like if you were to think about Star Trek and Captain Kirk and Spock, it's like when the enemy came along, a good captain of the ship would turn around to Spock and say, raise the shields, and those shields would protect those in the ship from danger without. And when the danger was dealt with or it went away, then they could lower the shields. And when the captain needed the people to get on to some R&R or to bring supplies on the ship, they could lower the shields. And so a good captain and the people on the bridge knew when to raise the shields and lower the shields. So your parents are those captains, and so they needed to be able to raise shields to protect you and when to lower shields when you needed nurturing. So this is what this is talking about. The invasive abuse is the things that are obvious that come through there. And I'll just spend some time looking at this, which ones fit you and what you experienced in your life. Now, these are brought on because of loose boundaries, when your parents didn't know when to raise the shields or there were not the safety involved in that. And so a lot of things either happened from your parents, within siblings, or around in your environment growing up. It could be through your athletics, your neighborhood, whatever, school, and different places, where you weren't protected because the boundaries were too loose. Now, then there is the boundaries, the rigid boundaries where things didn't happen, you didn't know they should have happened unless you saw them in other families, and you said, wow, my family doesn't do this, my mom or dad doesn't do this, wonder why, and then you begin to realize, you begin to say, we don't have that, I don't have that in my home. So these are kind of abuses of omission. They didn't happen, we didn't know they were supposed to happen, and so therefore we don't know we didn't get it. And so we're kind of walking around with these holes in us and not sure where they came from or why they weren't met. And so there is everything from the no listening, the nurturing, the lack of nurturing, and expressed expression. Now, there can also be this, and I'll put this up here eventually, is that when there is just a lack of interest, there's a huge, huge abuse. And it just doesn't happen. It's like there's no one that has interest in you and your life and what's going on with it. And then there's the physical, the sexual, and the spiritual. Just take a few minutes, look at those things, and see what do you identify with. Now, I by no means have nailed all of them. I mean, there'll be some things in your spirit, as you go through and build your egg, you realize, I didn't get. I don't have that. I didn't. You knew something was missing. Somewhere along the way you began to see something's missing. All right? Now, once you begin to do this, now your egg is going to look very much like this. You know, you're going to start by putting up your rules of your family over here. Then on your other side, now this is a big sheet. It's a flip chart sheet. So you use something big so that you can get all the things on there. So here's the rules of your family as you grew up. What roles you played out in your family at different times or at the same time. And then down here, I want you to put down descriptive adjectives of your father. Now, I encourage you, what did he do as his career? What was his religious background? Where did you do? Was it rural suburbs or was he in the city? What was going on? Give some information about your father. Now, maybe you had a stepfather. Maybe you were raised by a grandfather. Maybe there were some uncles in your life or an older sibling that played out the father role. Put those in there too. Add them in. Maybe you never really knew your father, okay? But put him up there and say, I didn't know him, okay? Now, you might have been told stories about him. Maybe he died before you were born and you're told stories about him. Then write down the stories that you heard growing up, that you knew about him. The same goes for mother. I want you to write down descriptive, 1 or 2 word descriptive adjectives of mom, good and bad. And what describes her? What was her religious background? What did she grow up in? Did she have a career? Did she work? Did she go to school? Give some of those information there as you do this. And then you move over to your egg. Now, as you begin to build your egg on this big sheet of paper, you start down here at the earliest memory you have, or it could be a memory that you don't really recall yourself doing it, but the family told stories as you got together for gatherings and different things, or around the table and said, remember when Billy Bob did this? You know, in other words, you heard stories that happened to you the time you got left at church and everybody went home and you weren't in the car and they had to go back and get you and you felt like you had been left behind or something. You know, something like that. You may not remember it. They talk about it and they teased about it, so you do recall it. Put it in here. Then go up through here and I want you to draw pictures. I would suggest that you number them and keep your cheat sheet. So later when you're doing this and you're looking back over this or going over this with your therapist, you will remember what that picture was. Now, as you go up through here, I want you to draw pictures that symbolized for you those events that were either traumatic, painful, difficult, or sexual. If there were sexual experiences, I want you to put them in there chronologically as far back as you can go, all the way to present day. Okay? Let me give you a couple of hints. Make sure you don't forget your cheat sheet. Make sure that you also leave some blanks along the way, because I guarantee you 100% of the time, including myself when I did this egg twice, that there were times where I forgot things. And as I'm telling my story, I suddenly remembered it, and then with the blank space, I could put it in. Okay? So I recommend you doing that. I'm sure that if there's any questions, you can't do this wrong. First of all, let me just belie some of your concerns and fears. You can't do this wrong. Bottom line, even when I did mine and I sat down with my therapist and went over this, you know, one of the things that I realized that I left some big pieces out. And it wasn't just like, okay, that's all right, I'll go back and do another egg around those. We usually will put on here what we're ready to deal with. So just trust your higher power, trust God, that He brings to the surface, it brings to your memory what you need to deal with now. You can always, this is a tool you can use over and over. So no sweat. Don't worry about it. You can't flunk this one. You get an A+ already. Now, the point is this, that at some point along the way, your therapist is going to begin to help you connect the dots to let you see that when you're experiencing something up here as an adult, you're suddenly, spontaneously childified all the way back down to an early event that's very similar in its shame message and so forth. Now, one of the things that's really important, your therapist will go over this with you, I encourage them to, is find out what are the messages of some of these things. Now, I've got one of these done. This is just one message. When you're here, what does this experience say about you, and how old did you feel, or how far back does that go? And it says, well, I felt the same message here, I felt the same message here, and it goes all the way back to here. And wow, when I was 6 years old, I remember feeling this and thinking the same thing. Now, chances are that part of what you're going to be doing here, and the purpose is that your therapist can walk you through and bring healing all the way back to here, so that when that trap door shuts on you, you don't go back to this age and trying to make decisions in your adult life today. It's pretty tough, okay? Now, I want you to realize that, I encourage you to realize that your healing goes from the bottom up. So you're going to be going through things in your own world where it's like you're starting here and you're learning that as you continue to do your healing work with your therapist and your recovery work, you're going to find that your healing will take place, and it may take time, but you go from the bottom up. All right? Thank you much. I appreciate it. Have a good day.